Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest mysteries and disappearances video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue that brand new book that's titled Vanished, Mysterious Disappearances. This one again having to do with this topic associated with strange disappearances that have occurred throughout the world, in particular from a long time back up until the present. And so I'm going to showcase some of that other information here with the first chapter. So the first chapter I did part 1 the other day, and in it we were talking about the disappearance of Colonel Fawcett. This one will pretty much end this part here, and then the next part will feature yet another new disappearance. So let's go ahead and let's talk about this particular chapter, or the end of this segment of this chapter. Then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on it too. Let me know what you guys think about this book. So far it's been pretty good in terms of providing some pretty nice, concise detail associated with each disappearance. So here's what this next part states. But no more dispatches did get out. This in itself was not a cause for immediate concern because Fawcett had anticipated being enveloped in the jungle for at least 2 years. Roger Corderville's story surfaced at the end of this 2-year period, that is to say, when news of the expedition was to be expected. The year 1927 was not a particularly newsworthy one, and the press, desperately on the lookout for a good copy, pitched into it with a hearty appetite. And so began the long search for the colonel and his companions. In May 1928, the first rescue party was organized. It was led by Commander George Diet. In contrast to Fawcett's practice of traveling light, Diet insisted on a party which included 20 native bearers, 64 bullocks, 10 mules, and a great deal of audio-visual equipment. From Dead Horse Camp, Diet struck out for the river Coulisay and managed to make contact with some Anaquai Indians, one of whom wore around his neck a medallion which on closer scrutiny was found to be a brass label stamped with the name of the city firm which had purchased Fawcett with his supplies. The Indians swore that this had been a present from the colonel. After Fawcett had left them, they said his campfire smoke had been sighted rising above the trees, farther and farther away, for 5 days afterwards. On the 6th day, there was no smoke, and the Anaquai chief was of the opinion that the small party had been massacred by the neighboring Suya tribesmen. Diet, however, suspected the Anaquai themselves of the deed, especially as the Anaquai chief Aloqui appeared to be wearing a pair of Fawcett's trousers. But Diet did not have long to ponder on the possibility at the time. Following a warm welcome, prompted perhaps by curiosity, the party found the Anaquai becoming more restless with constant demands for presents. It was only by exercising stealth that Diet was able to escape during the hours of darkness, thus narrowly avoiding the fate of compounding the mystery he had set out to resolve. As of 1932, sightings of Fawcett were still occurring. For example, in that year, a Swiss hunter named Stephen Ratton arrived at the British consulate in Sao Paulo claiming he had discovered Fawcett. While hunting in the Mato Grosso near Tapajos, he had entered a native village where he encountered a white man being held prisoner. Clad in nothing but skins, the prisoner identified himself as a British colonel, begging Ratton to seek out a Major Paget who could come to his rescue as soon as he heard of his pitiable condition. He showed Ratton a ring, the description of which enabled Mrs. Fawcett to identify it as the one her husband always wore. Interestingly enough, Fawcett had also known a Major Paget who had helped to finance his expedition. Armed with this apparent confirmation, Stephen Ratton returned to the jungle to effect the colonel's rescue and was never heard of again. Over the succeeding years, reliable reports of Fawcett's fate came to light with enough regularity to keep public interest alive. In 1933, the leader of an expedition to the Culuin River, Virginio Pesioni, reported that 3 white men whose descriptions fitted those of the Fawcett party had been living for some years with the Arovudu Indians. The youngest, Jack Fawcett, had married an Indian woman who had borne him a white, blue-eyed son. In 1934, 2 American missionaries, Gilly and Halverson told a similar story, only in their version, the Kirikuri Indians were the adopted tribe. In 1935, two brothers, Patrick and Gordon Uliat, made two expeditions to the Mato Grosso, in the course of which they ascertained that the local rubber gatherers claimed to know much about Colonel Fawcett. The most celebrated of the later expeditions was led by a journalist, Edmar Morel, in 1943. Morel hoped to locate Jack Fawcett's alleged son, and in the course of his search met with Izariri, the Kalapos chief who apparently admitted to killing all three white men. Morel also succeeded in finding a boy called Dulipi, with whom he believed to be much talked of, the white child, and then took him to Sao Paulo. The wretched Dulipi, however, turned out to be a native albino, the condition of albinism being not unknown among local tribes. Colonel Fawcett's younger son, Brian, who himself lived and worked in Peru for many years, continued to search for the answer to his father's disappearance, but by 1953, when he edited an edition of the Colonel's memoirs, it seemed that even he had given up all hope. Fresh interest was aroused on the book's publication, for even then it seemed possible that Fawcett could still be alive, a demented old man attired in rags, wandering aimlessly through the jungles of Mato Grosso, ever waiting for the rescue that one day might still come. 10 years later, when the clearance of the tropical rainforest was underway, it was thought that the process might somehow throw up clues to Fawcett's ultimate fate, but it never did, only succeeding for all time in obliterating any lingering hopes. So what did actually befall the 1925 Fawcett expedition? The most likely explanation is that, weakened by disease, the party was finished off by natives, the most likely culprits behind the Anaquai, although it could just as well have been any one of a handful of mutually hostile tribes. As Diet's substantial party was in considerable danger, Fawcett's compact and comparatively defenseless group would have made easy pickings. Or, having failed in the search for El Dorado, had Fawcett hidden himself in the jungle, too ashamed to tell the world of his failure? Or had he, as some said, gone native, settling down among the Indians as a much venerated great white chief? Or had he, after all, found the fabled city, which had turned out to be a counterpart of Shangri-La, a fantastic world of eternal youth? If no solution could be found in the land of the living, perhaps something could be gleaned from beyond the grave. Just as today, leading clairvoyants, upon the demise of a prominent personality, claimers to tell the world of messages received, so in the 1930s no medium worth his or her salt could afford to ignore the possibilities offered by the disappearing colonel. One of the most intriguing responses came from the society clairvoyant Mrs. St. John Montague. Staring piercingly into her crystal ball, Mrs. St. John Montague perceived three men. She said, one lay on the ground, his head resting on his arm. His clothes were in ribbons. He did not stir and appeared to be dead. Nearby, hacking away through the undergrowth with an axe, was another man. With his arms he supported a young companion. Both were in rags with long hair and beards. They were gaunt and starved-looking. Both wore wisps of blood-stained bandages, and the younger of the two seemed to be at a point of death. According to Mr. Montague, the crystal then showed the crouching forms of naked savages armed with blowpipes and spears. The crystal swarm swam with blood, and when it cleared, it showed the lifeless forms of the three white men being borne away. Another more celebrated medium, Geraldine Cummings, claimed to have made direct contact with the departed spirit of Fawcett, according to which the expedition had succeeded in finding the lost city, which, it transpired, had proved to be an outpost of the mythical civilization of Atlantis. And Jack Fawcett had indeed married an Indian girl, before both he and Raleigh Rimmel had been killed on the orders of an ostensibly friendly Indian chief. The colonel's own death at a later date had also been a violent one. Whatever the truth of the matter, further than beyond the grave, one cannot go. And then that's it. Let's go ahead and let's end this segment here once again into chapter 1 from the book Vanished, Mysterious Disappearances. This one having to do with the story of Colonel Percy Fawcett. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. For starters, I still have a pretty haunting image associated with the beginning of the segment where it shows potentially that Colonel Fawcett was found, but as an older man. Like he was there laying down in some derelict area of the jungle, and there he was, almost, I don't know if he was like out of his mind at that point, but the person that saw him had again described him as just being ragged, disheveled, and just watching as basically tons and tons of mosquitoes were eating his legs alive, and he was just there letting it happen. So a prominent colonel at one point, and now a disheveled old man just seemingly out of his mind in another. That was still a pretty haunting image. And then the rest of the segment explored several possibilities about what could have happened to him, from the idea of him just basically becoming a victim of some of the local tribes there. I think honestly that's what happened too, thinking outside the box and then just finding the most logistic reasoning. I think that's what happened there. The colonel and his two or three other men that he had just ran into that situation, wrong place at the wrong time, and then that's where some of the natives were able to defeat them. And then the other idea that they in turn became part of the natives and then decided to commingle with them, I think that was a little bit more far-fetched. I think that would have, the news of that would have traveled further, and there would have been more proof associated with that. And then the other idea that they just got lost and maybe were never found, I would second that as the most prominent idea, because if you have an expedition and you have it going into these thick forests, these other banks, whatever, in other words, that they're there as far as these jungles, and who knows where they ended up, but somewhere along the way, something took them over where there was sickness, fatigue, and so on. They would have just died out there. Nobody would have known about them. They would have just become bones, and then those bones would have been long buried and withered about, and who knows what essentially would have happened to them afterward. So I think that's the second best case that I would have thought as far as his disappearance. But otherwise, the idea that people still ran into him, including one as a prisoner that was hanging on some place, and then people identified him with his ring, and then another one again, just a disheveled old man. Interesting theories. Unfortunately, there'll never be really an answer associated with them. But let me know what you guys think as far as what happened to him. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.